Hey folks, Ted from Immersion here, and I want to talk about something which you probably guessed from the title of this video that is seemingly polarizing, and I think a lot of it has to do with the quantification and what people consider around the stigma that is rules lawyering. But I also want to pose this to you in the form of a D&D story. I recently got to play in a campaign, or at least play a session in part of a larger campaign with some folks that I never played with before. And I experienced, well, I'll say there were rules lawyering potential scenarios, and then I want to pose the question, what would you do in my situation? So a really high level, rules lawyering, in my mind, has nothing but a negative connotation to it. And it's the concept of someone basically, saying like, oh, well, the rules are this. So it might be like, hey, I feel like more often than not, the way it's interpreted is the DM says something and the player is just like, no, actually the rules say this, and it might bog down the gameplay, depending on the person, right? And how they go about it. If it's posed in like, oh, well, maybe isn't it like this? That seems less than like, no, you're just flat out wrong. The rules state X. And again, right, maybe the DM made a ruling that that's a different thing in their game, and these are things you need to know about. But that's enough about rules lawyering and what it is, right? So let's talk about this story and this game that I played in. So to give you a little bit of background, the folks playing, it was 5th edition, they all knew each other. I think 2 of them were actually brothers, and they'd all known each other seemingly for quite a while. And this was, I think, like the 3rd or 4th session in this current campaign. So it was not a very long running campaign, so I came in relatively early. And there's a few instances of things that I would call, some are minor, some are very, very egregious, and I want to get your opinion on them. So, we have in the party a Dragonborn Paladin, I think an elf sorcerer, a lizard folk fighter, and my character was a lizard folk rogue. Okay? So, first sort of situation is there's a whole bunch of people trapped in cages, right? Or in iron barred cells. So, my thought would be, well, I'm a rogue, maybe I'll pick the locks and free the people. But the sorcerer steps in and says, no, don't worry, I've got this. And I should point out that the sorcerer in this scenario is what I would call the, he, I guess, might fall, not necessarily a rules lawyer, but this person is convinced that they know all the rules of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and they are sort of that person, like, oh, I'm the expert, I know all the rules, what I say goes. And it seems like in certain instances, which we'll talk about in a little bit, seems to sort of use that to bully the DM into force, like, not having a choice but to accept this, their decisions or their kind of rulings on these things. And I don't know if this is just how that relationship is, because I don't really know these people. So goes, well, I'll hold a firebolt in my hand, which, if you all know, firebolt is not a thing you can contain. Firebolt is just shot and then it's gone. And I will hold it in my hand, and I will burn the iron hinge pins out of all of the doors and then the doors will just fall off the cells. Or I'll burn the lock out of the door, or something like that. So, several issues there. And then also was quoted saying, fire burns at 1400 degrees, so it'll melt through the steel, or the iron. Well, again, as we said, firebolt does not produce flame. Produce flame actually states that you get to hold the fire in your hand. You can use it as a light source or whatever. So you could make more of an argument where it produced flame, you could hold it on something to heat it up. This is firebolt, it's shot and gone. Also did use the firebolt to try to be a flashlight torch, but obviously, again, we know that that doesn't work. And the DM just said fine. So again, this is me on the outside. We're going, well, that doesn't really work like that. And, a firebolt's not a cutting torch. It's not a high-powered gas, metal cutting torch that will just burn through or cut through these things. It's not a lightsaber. It's nothing crazy. And in my games, if someone asked me, hey, can I do this? I might say, sure, but it's going to take you hours. You're going to have to heat this metal up enough with your non-enclosed, non-forged, non-acetylene, heat source. And you're going to be sitting there holding this thing, if you could even do that, to get it up to be red hot. And then honestly, you're probably still going to need to use a pair of tools to pry it apart, but you've heated it up enough to loosen it. But not just like everybody's free. And that's exactly how it happened with no weight whatsoever. So, okay, this is like the first scenario of me being in the group here. So I'm like, all right, well, I don't want to step in. I don't know these people, right? The DM said it was okay, and everybody seems to be having fun. What would you do in my scenario? Would you call out and be like, well, the rules say you can't do that, and Firebolt, you can't hold it. It definitely won't melt an iron bar, not in a matter of seconds. Okay, so we move on, but I want to know your opinion. Let me know. What would you do? Would you have stepped up like I did? Or would you have, just let it go? Or stepped up like I didn't, rather, and then just let it go like I did. Then we move on later on to basically what's going to prove to be the sole combat encounter of the entire session. Okay, we're walking into a room. I don't feel like we were really sneaking, but there's a wizard in the room casting a spell at us. Sees us, is going to cast a spell at us or something, or is casting a spell. And then that same sorcerer says, well, I'm going to cast Mage Hand at him and poke him in the eye, and that'll disrupt his spell casting so his spell doesn't go off. Well, we all know Mage Hand can't be used to attack. Yes, it can hold things that weigh up to 10 pounds, but it's not an attack. You don't make an attack roll. And to that point, the DM didn't even have him make an attack roll. He just said, I poke him in the eye and disrupt his spell. And he's confident in the way he goes about saying these things. So I don't know if that is why the DM just believes it or whatnot, because the DM was just like, okay, and that was that. All right, sure. So then we go into the room, and the big combat starts, right? So then the sorcerer says, I'm going to twin spell the haste spell. Okay. So a solid move. We've got a paladin and a fighter. It's an Echo Knight fighter, just to give a point of reference. But nobody here, and again, this is where I didn't speak up because I don't want to ruin everybody's fun. They seem to be having a good time. They're treating the Echo Knight as a sole entity, which if any of you guys know how Echo Knight works, you can make your attacks, or the Echo Knight can make attacks, and you can do that one ability, whatever it's called, where it gets to make like a bonus action attack. He casts Haste on the fighter, and now somehow the fighter gets Haste, but because the Echo Knight is created by the fighter, he also gets Haste, and now our fighter has 8 attacks with Action Surge. 2 for him, 2 for the hasted action, which we all know if you read Haste, it says if you take the attack action, you can make 1 attack, not your whole action's worth of attacks. 2 attacks from him, 2 attacks from haste action, 2 attacks for the Echo Knight, and then 2 attacks for the Echo Knight's haste. 8 attacks. We are level 6, folks. The Echo Knight makes 8 attacks. Granted, he hits with like 2 of the 8, so it didn't really break the game other than slowing it down as he rolled all those dice. But the DM just nods and approves and moves on. Okay, that's a little strange. I thought about that, it was a little funny. Later on, we're in a different sort of scenario here in the fight, and the wizard, the enemy caster, we're all positioned around a room, and he's going to drop a fireball on himself, okay, to try to hit the party. And I'm the only one as the rogue that's very far away that won't be hit by that. The Dragonborn will, the fighter will, and the wizard definitely will. He's going to drop it. So then the wizard says, well, I'm going to use my reaction to duck out of the room and into the hallway. There was no prepared action, no readied action to say, if he casts a spell, then I will move into the hallway. I will use the readied dash action to move into the hallway. The sorcerer just didn't want to get hit with the fireball, which he definitely would have been hit with. And he just tells the DM, I'm going to use my reaction to move into the hallway so I don't take any damage from the fireball. And the DM just says, okay. What? All right, I guess that's how that works. The party moves around, leaving... Enemies and party are moving around, leaving threatened squares, and no one's calling for opportunity attacks. The DM's not taking them. The party's not taking them. So I just don't know if they're unaware of that scenario. And then the same sorcerer who stepped out of the room with his reaction ability that he doesn't have calls out his younger brother later for trying to use his reaction to do something and, quote, says, you don't have anything that gives you a reaction to do that. So we've got a double standard here on that very clearly. And I'm just trying to think. There was just so many little instances of stuff. We had the paladin not using any smiting abilities, but using a smite spell and applying the smite spell damage every turn. Like casting branding smite, and then first attack gets branding smite hits, then the second attack gets branding smite and it hits, not what it clearly states on the spell. Everybody here also, by the way, using spell cards. Not that that necessarily matters, but it's all physical, materials. No one's using like D&D Beyond or something like that. And then later on in the same campaign, we've closed out that combat where I haven't spoken up at all because I know the rules. I know the rules really well. I know them on a higher tier with a lot of other folks who know the rules really well. Like, I'd say I have more than a general working knowledge of how 5th edition rules work. And a lot of that comes from all of you calling me out if I make a mistake or pointing me to a reference that I can go check to better myself and my knowledge of the rules. So all of these things are clearly not how the game is designed to be played. But everybody at the table is having fun. And every time someone asks the DM if they can do that, the DM says yes. And then later on in the same session, Twin Spell Haste returns, but this time the sorcerer twin spells the haste on the fighter. So he gives him double haste. So now the 8 attacks with action surge become 16 attacks. And like, if you read Twin Spell, it very clearly states you need to target. Oh, you know what it was? He targeted him, and then he targeted the Echo with the secondary haste. That's what it was. But the Echo's not a creature, so it doesn't get targeted. But so whatever. Anyway, that was the thing. And if you read it, it clearly states that you can't do that. They at least mentioned concentration once, but no one was making concentration checks for taking damage. Enemies or allies. And at one point, with haste up, the spell Dragon's Breath was cast by the sorcerer, twin spell Dragon's Breath, and then said, I'm going to twin spell Dragon Breath on you two, the fighter and the paladin, and then it immediately forces you to use your bonus action right now to use your Dragon's Breath attack. We all know that that's not the case. It gives you the option on your turn, if you would like to, use a bonus action to cast Dragon Breath. So I don't know if people are just not reading their spells and not understanding how they work or whatnot, but those are sort of the scenarios that were presented. When we got out of combat and we're doing like role play around the town and stuff, it was a lot of fun, right? That was a really good storyline that was set. I really enjoyed it. But I struggled very much so in what to do. I know that there are very egregious rules violations happening left and right here. But everybody at the table, minus my inner turmoil of the nails on the chalkboard of these rules just being completely destroyed, everyone was having fun. And the DM, whether he's just complacent with anything that his players ask for or not, was allowing everything that was being said and not questioning any of the things that were being said. So I don't know what I should have done, and that's why I'm asking all of you, what would you do? If you were presented with one or maybe all of the scenarios that I went through, would you speak up? And how would you go about it? Would you call it out right at the table and say, hey, well, that's just not how that works? Would you pull the DM to the side, maybe after or between sessions, and say, hey, man, I just want you to know that, like, I don't know if maybe this is a homebrew thing that you have in your world, and I don't want to mess with that. But just so you know, like, these are all shenanigans. Like, none of these are legitimate. That's just not how they work. Or would you try and interject the rules into the game by means of doing things, right? Like, well, he's leaving my space, so can I make an opportunity attack against him? And then, like, oh, we've brought up opportunity attacks in the game. And I hit him. Wasn't he concentrating on hold person? Shouldn't he have to make a concentration check? Oh, concentration checks, right? So I don't know if, like, that's a better way to go about it, where you're sort of innocently questioning whether or not you get to do something when you have full concrete facts that you should. Or do you just call it out for the bullshit that it is? I don't know. And, like, this, in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, but in my mind, if I'm like, well, hey, guys, that's not how that works, am I technically not a rules lawyer at that point? Rules lawyering this table and telling them, well, that's just not how it works. And honestly, 90% of this could be fixed if you just read the spell clearly from start to finish. It outlines what it does. Or read how Twin Spell works, or Sorcery, and all these different things. If you read those abilities in full, it will explain it. But maybe it's because this one player is overly confident in that he absolutely knows everything he's talking about, or that the DM just doesn't know the rules that well and is sort of complacent with suggestions from the players, or, you know, maybe this is just how they have fun. I don't know. But because I was the new guy, I didn't want to be the one who's just like, hey, well, let me dismantle your game piece by piece, because most of the combat is just wrong in every possible aspect. And then the final question I have for all of you, we've discussed how would you go about addressing these issues and what would you do? Would you go back? Would you play in this campaign again? Would you only play in this campaign again if the rules were fixed? Or would you just kind of lean heavily into it and be like, well, screw it. I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want. The DM doesn't care about the rules. The players are making up whatever they want. Well, now my rogue's got 6 attacks, you know, or whatever. Sneak attack works every turn for me. Oh, I used cunning action to make 3 attacks. That's a thing. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't want to do that because that's not me. I know how the rules work and are supposed to be followed as intended and as written. So I don't want to lean into this and just be like, well, screw it. We can just make up whatever we want. I'm God now and just make up my own rules. But at the same time, if I were to go back and play again in this session, I will be drastically underpowered and underutilized because I'm playing the game as it's designed to be played, not on God mode like everybody else is. So anyway, I'm very curious what your thoughts are. Rules lawyering is always a touchy subject, but I feel like every time it's brought up, it's always in that negative connotation where it's just like, actually, DM, you're wrong. The rules state this. But what about in a scenario where I just described, where some of those are written by general science of the real world, and you could say, well, science doesn't have a place. It's a magic fire spell. Argument made, right? I don't know. So I'm hoping with your feedback, we can, maybe I'll either get validation that what I did was right by sitting quiet, or I'll just get called out by all of you, be like, no, man, you know better, speak up. I don't know. Let me know. And let me know what you think about these kind of D&D stories, also mixed in with, like, legitimate discussion topics. I don't know. Maybe I'll do more of these. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.